Hi, I'm Maureen Carlson, and I'm here with 3 of these little characters that are made from the What a Character push molds 3, 4, and 5. What they have in common is their hands. Their hands are all made from our What a Character push mold number 6. It's a 2-part mold, and you can make hands that are approximately 2 1/4 inches tall, though you can make them smaller or bigger depending on how you press or push them. Now these molds are developed by Dan, who pours them from a silicone rubber, which is a pink rubber, which you can see. It's a silicone rubber that is very flexible. It's also formulated to be extra strong and to be durable for approximately 10 years. It doesn't mean it will disintegrate at 10 years, but they have a good 10 years of life in them. We're very proud of them. We think you will enjoy them, but I'd like to show you how to use them. If you're curious about using the face push molds F3, F4, and F5, you can find information about them in a separate video. But right now, let's talk about hands. I know a lot of you probably buy molds or tools and never ever read the directions. But in this case, I think you will have better luck using the push molds. If you do read these directions, they're quite detailed. But I'm going to put this aside because I'm going to show you what's in those directions. And so, first of all, you're going to start with a ball of clay. I'm using polymer clay today, though you could use other kinds of clay. And you're going to roll a ball that's approximately 1 3/4 inches wide. Now, that's about 1/2 of a package of clay. Most polymer clay comes in 2-ounce packages or 57 grams. So half of this would be 1 ounce or approximately 27 grams of clay. So 1 package is enough for 2 hands. Roll the ball into a teardrop or cone shape that's approximately 3 inches long. Lay that on your workspace. Now you're going to flatten this into a hand shape. So let's just look at a hand for a minute. Those of you that have read my how-to clay books on sculpting know that I talk a lot about hands. See how your hand is thin here, and then it slopes up and it's thicker at the wrist. We want to do that same thin to thick slope with this piece of clay. This is going to be the finger end. Now, in your pattern packet, you have this little diagram that shows you what shape we're looking for, and we're going to make this into that shape. So, I'm going to start by flattening it a little bit, and see how it's getting thinner here and thicker here. We're going to keep making that thinner, but not real thin. We don't want fingers that are like spaghetti. Now, if you look at the pattern, there's this lump here that's for the thumb. So we've got to bring some of that clay down so that it is wide at this part, which is where your thumb is. And it's still thicker here than it is here. Now let's compare it with the pattern. It's close. Doesn't have to be exact. And the way we're going to tell if it's going to work is we're going to take a look at these 2 little hands. Now, Dan cut these out already so that we have a little pattern to work with. We're going to use the right side for this one. We're going to lay it on there, make sure that it all fits onto the clay. Now you're going to take a knife. I'm going to use my trusty 30-year-old favorite knife. You could use an X-Acto type blade or some other type of blade tool if you like. You're going to actually cut around this pattern. Now another way to do it so that you don't have to leave that pattern on there is to take a needle tool and draw around the pattern. You can do that as well. That might be a little bit easier for us to see what's happening. We're going to draw around that. And let's see what we have here. Yes, looks like a hand, but it looks like a pretty fat hand. I think we're going to have to adapt it a little bit because as I'm looking at the side there, look how fat those fingers are. That will be a huge hand. So you have a lot of control now in terms of how much clay you're going to be using for this hand. And I'll show you in just a minute how you can adapt some of that. I'm going to cut that one a little bit shorter because I know it's too thick. Get rid of that. So I'm going to thin this down a little bit, thin that down a little bit, thin that down a little bit, flatten that out, flatten that thumb out a little bit more, lay the pattern on top of it again. Let's just see where we're at. So cut that off. Now, it may seem like a lot of work to do this part of it, but it will pay off in just a minute. Believe me, it will. It will. I'm going to cut a little bit more off there. Oh, and look at that thumb. That finger is really fat, so we're going to cut a little more off there. And let's compare it with this. It's close. Thumb's still too big. I'm going to leave all of that there in case I want to use some of that for the arm. So get rid of this junk, and we'll take a look at the side view. Pull some of this to the back. So see how it's starting to look like a hand? Now you're going to pick it up, and you're going to use the tips of your fingers to pat, pat, roll, pat, 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 roll. Make those smooth. Make this smooth. Now, as I'm doing this, this looks like how I start hands that I make without a mold. So what's the advantage of the mold? You'll see in just a minute. Wait. So now I've got this. I'm going to straighten out those fingers. And I'm going to go on the inside and take my knitting needle and just press down a little bit on the inside right there. So now it looks like this. Now we're going to see if it fits into this mold. So it's pretty close, but one of the nice things about this mold is it opens up. So look at, I can pull this open. See how that just fits right in there? It's right in there. Fit this in there. We'll lift this up. Fit that in. Now what am I going to do if it doesn't fit? Am I going to just force it in there? No, because if it doesn't fit, it's going to run over the mold, and then you will have to trim the edges of your hand, and it's really going to be a lot of work to make it look neat. See how those are fitting into that? Now right here I have too much. I'm going to pull this down into the palm because I want to see way down to here. I want to be able to see that mold right there between the fingers so that the fingers are separated. See how that's just fitting right in there? There we go. Now here we don't want anything to run over, so we're going to push it all into the mold, into the mold. We can pull some of it down in here into the bottom of the hand, because if you look at your hand, see how it's fatter right there? And it's fat right here by the bottom of your thumb. So we're going to push that over into that. Okay. Now, before we put this bottom part on, which is going to make the palm, I'm going to check one more time and see if anything runs over. And then I'm going to push it a little bit like that. See how that made the hand skinnier? So we have a little bit of edge all the way around. Now we're going to very carefully pick this up, lay it so the sides all match. Don't push it. Make sure everything matches. And then push, not real hard, just hard enough that everything touches together. Now let's see if it worked. There we go. See, now we have the palm. Now very carefully we can pull this out, turn it over, and look at that. Now right here I've got a little bit of glitch on that fingernail, so I'm going to just pull that up a little bit. There we go. Now the edge here is a little bit rough, then that's just because that's where the two parts met. So I'm going to smooth that down, smooth that a little bit, smooth that a little bit. Now the consistency of the clay when you're using the mold, it's better if it's a little bit stiff. Not real stiff, but a little bit stiff. So there we go. Just smoothed out a few places that were a little rough. Can come right here between the fingers again. And then I'm going to take it right here where the sides of the arm are, and I'm just going to roll it a little bit between my hands to smooth out those edges. Now we have a hand. Now, here's another hand that I've made with the same mold. It's pretty much the same. It looks like this one has a little bit more clay in it, but I want to put some life into this hand. So I'll show you a couple things that we can do. If I want my hand to do this, I need to take this thumb and all of the flesh that's right below the thumb, like right here along the side of the hand, I need to bend that over. So it's a little bit like a corner. See how that's a corner? Now I want this to move, so we're going to bend that. And take a look at your own hand and see how it copies that. Then if you wanted to bend out your knuckles, you're going to bend each of those. Now don't push real hard or you're going to get rid of all the lines that the mold made in the hand. So now look, we have, well, my finger's a little bit skinny there. Now we have a hand that can actually do something. You can also put that a little like that. So there, we have a hand. Now you could just bake it just like this. And what I frequently will do is bake it on some fiberfill so that it stays, so it doesn't flatten it too much. The fiberfill supports it. Some people like to bake in a bed of cornstarch or baking powder or baking soda, not baking powder, baking soda or cornstarch. I particularly like to use the fiberfill. Oh, one other thing. You could do a little bit more right here if you want that to emphasize a little bit. Looks like Dan's hand, that big square hand there. Now, how are you going to use this hand? You have to figure out how you're going to use it. Are you going to run a wire into there after it's baked? If so, you might want to take a wire and just put a hole in there right now. Now, that would work, but it won't be real secure. A way to make it more secure would be to take a wire and put a loop in the end of it just by bending it, just like you would an eye pin, and carefully force that up into the arm and just up into the bottom of the hand. Be careful you don't come through the back side. And then I'm going to roll that again just a little bit to make sure that that's relatively smooth. Now we have a hand that actually is supported in the wrist, so it doesn't have a broken wrist. Now I'm just going to lay this down for a minute and show you one more thing. If I'm going to use this for making a doll that has clothes on, like fabric clothes, to keep the arm from the clothes from sliding up the arm, one of the things that you can do is make a little ring of clay right around the bottom of this arm, or the wrist, I guess it is, sort of at the base of the wrist, so that you can drawstring the sleeve right there so that the clay can't go beyond that, or that the fabric can't go beyond that point. So then you could wire this in. Once it's baked, you could wire this into your armature and you have a hand for your character. Here I have a character that was made from our push mold F3. And I think this F6 hand looks a little bit big for him. The reason for that is I scrunched the face and made a smaller face than a regular 3-inch face. Looks like it's more like maybe a 2.25-inch face, 2.5-inch face. Now, the average head, when you compare it with a hand, the fingers would come right in the middle of the forehead. And you can see here on this F6 hand that it comes about to the top of his head. We want to make a smaller hand, more like this size. So how would we do that with a mold? How do we end up making a smaller hand when the mold is just one size? Well, let me show you. To make the smaller hand, I'm going to start just the way I did the first time, except I'm going to make this paddle a little bit thinner. And when I cut, I'm going to cut inside of the cut lines, so it's just a little bit smaller to start with. So we're going to cut just inside of all of those lines. And the nice thing about using a mold is you haven't really invested a lot of time. So let's say you really, really wreck it and you make a really ugly hand. It's either way too big or way too small. You don't need to despair. After all, you can just very easily recreate it again. You haven't lost a lot of time. You haven't lost any clay because you can reuse the clay. And every time you do it, it will get easier. Now this clay that I'm using for this hand, this brown clay, is really soft. So I'm having to be a little bit careful because it's stretching a little bit out of shape. And then I'm going to take the hand and I'm going to make it a little bit shorter right there. Now once again, I'm going to smooth off the edges by patting and pushing and rolling. I'm not stretching, I'm just patting and pushing and rolling, mostly those ends, because that's what's apt to show if the clay doesn't come all the way to the end of the mold. Okay, so now we have that. Once again, I'm going to take my knitting needle and just push down a little bit between the fingers, right there. Sort of a floppy little hand right here. Okay, we're going to take the clay, we're going to put it into the mold. And this time I want to be sure that nothing runs over at all. Well, both times I wanted to be sure. But this time I especially want to be sure that everything fits into the mold because we want a little hand. Now I'm going to push it in, 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 push it in. See how this is really floppy? I'm going to push it in right at the end where the fingernail is there. Now we're going to push it back together this way. Push it back together this way. Make sure that one pushes too. So we have the skinny little hand. It's not going to be a whole lot smaller than it was the first time, but I think it will be smaller. We're going to once again fit it together. Make sure it meets all the edges. And then we're going to press. Pick it up. There's our hand. Now we have this hand with skinny fingers this time. And there we go. And I'm going to push it together a little bit there to make it a narrower hand. See what a difference that makes just to push it together there. Now we're going to hold it very carefully and push it up a little. Push this up a little. Now let's compare it with the other hand that we made before and see how it compares. See how it's thinner? It's narrower. The fingers are thinner. Now right here I've got a little bit of a floppy wrist thing going, so I'm going to smudge that down. Get rid of that seam line. There we go. And oops, I got one there too. You know, this, when you get something like that, you can repair that with your knitting needle. If you can hold this like a hot potato and not squeeze it, just sort of gently hold this. There we go. And right here, we've got a little bit of raw, edgy thing happening right there, right there, right there. Straighten these fingers up. I've got a little crooked thing happening right there, but I think if we put the fingers together, it'll give them a little more stability, and that won't show so much. There we go. Now we're going to fold this over. Bring the thumb that way. So now we have this. I'll hold it still so you can see it. Straighten up those fingers. Now we're going to bend it a little bit right there. Very gently bend it there and there. And this clay is so soft that I'm erasing some of the marks just by touching it. This is kind of like a visual reminder for you to have clay that is a little bit stiff. Now I'm going to chop this off right there and smooth this out again. There we go. And then quick, before he collapses, it collapses anymore, I'm going to put a wire in there, but I see that I don't have this one bent into an eye pin, so let me just show you a quick way to do that. I have my needle nose pliers. I bent it around in a loop. Then I take it right there and I bend it back. See how that creates an eye pin? Very carefully, we're going to shove this up. Well, shove isn't a careful word, but that's what we're doing. Shove it up just to the base of that hand. Going to roll this again. Smooth it out. Whoa, it's soft. There we go. I want to show you one other little tip. Let's say you're doing this hand and oh, the thumb looks really horrible, which this one did look pretty bad, and you just decide you're going to smooth out the end again, but you lose the fingernail. Here's a quick way to put in a fingernail. This is a drinking straw. Can you see that? How that's a drinking straw that's been cut open along one side, and a piece has been cut out. The other end has been cut into the curve, the shape of your cuticle. If you take that and hold it flat right on top of the finger or the thumb, press down and then tip up just a little bit. See how that makes a thumbnail? Then if you take the other end, or let's take this end, and we're going to push it right there, right under the nail, and then go like this. There we go. See how that creates a nail? Quick way to do some repairs. Well, that is it for this little hand. We're going to plop it in the oven. Remember, if you want it to hold into a sleeve, you're going to put a little ring around it there. You know, I might actually let this clay rest and do this one over and let the clay firm up a bit, because see how it got really raggy there. So we're going to close with this one that looks a little more detailed. And we're going to say goodbye. Check out our molds